So if you watched my last video where I raced this Arctic Leopard in an enduro race, I said that I got a pinch flat near the end of the race when the battery was going dead. Well, that was just a guess. But today I've pulled this apart, and what I found is actually that I just ripped the tube at the valve stem. And the reason this happens is because this wheel does not have a rim lock from the factory. That's your only hole, and that's for your valve stem. So if you're going to ride this bike in rough conditions with low pressures, I would recommend installing a rim lock. And somewhere on here, I'm looking for it, is the width. There it is. So it's a 1.85 wide, 8-10-inch diameter. So I would recommend buying a rim lock, and all you have to do is drill a hole somewhere 90 degrees off from your valve stem or 180 out. It doesn't really matter. And what that does is that clamps the bead of the tire to your rim, so your wheel cannot spin inside your tire. And that's exactly what happens. You give the bike power, it's hooked up, and the wheel spins inside the tire, and that just cocks the valve stem. Even though the valve stem has these little locking nuts, it can still spin it and ruin your tube and ruin your ride or your race. So that's going to be a suggestion for sure. A lot of bikes come factory with a rim lock, but this one does not. A nice lightweight rim lock would be ideal. It does have some knurling on the inside of the wheel, which is nice for grip. But when you have low pressure, the pressure is the only thing that holds the bead out in your wheel to keep it from spinning. So low pressure means, well, low pressure here. And just for fun, here is what my wheel looks like after that race. It's not bad. It's got a little bit of run out in it. Not much at all. I wouldn't be concerned or worried about this much. But you can look at the rotor. Rotor's taking a couple little hits. And the reason this wheel's already a little bit out of true is because this stock tire, being 190/18, 100 is your width this way. 90 is your aspect ratio, which means it's 90% of this 100mm width. 18 is obviously your rim size. But what that means is there's not a lot of sidewall here to take a big impact on a sharp rock or a sharp ledge or root or whatever. So a taller tire has benefits and drawbacks. You can run it at lower pressures. There's more sidewall to give and absorb those hits, but it's going to be heavier and a bigger diameter. So you're going to lose a little bit of torque since it is heavier and it's a larger diameter. So of course that's a downside, but it'll keep your wheels alive longer too. Now this is the tire I want to run on this bike. This is one of my favorite tires for the terrain I ride in. This is an IRC JX8. It's an excellent tire in the rocks, especially if it's wet rocks. The problem is 110/118. This is the smallest size you can get this tire in. So IRC, if you're watching this, please make us E-Moto guys this tire in a 100/118, or even a 190/18, but 100/100 would be best. This is, like I said, one of my favorite tires, but you can see the difference in the widths. It's quite a bit wider. And the problem with that is chain clearance. Now, up here, there's plenty of room to move the chain out. The sprocket has a nut to hold it on, or a bolt, so you can easily space the sprocket out slightly. Tons of room for the frame. You can see what the chain's gotten on top there. The problem is, there's plenty of width for the tire in the swing arm. The problem is, the actual sprocket cannot move out very far before it gets into the swing arm here. So I'm designing a spacer right now, that's why I've got this off, to space the sprocket out as much as possible, which unfortunately is only about 1/8 of an inch. I don't know if that's going to be enough to get this big fat tire on there. Also, the width of this wheel is going to pinch this tire a little bit narrower, kind of like this, but not much. So I'm gonna do everything I can to fit this tire on there, but please, somebody, Kenda, make an Ibex, or somebody make a nice gummy tire for us enduro guys in a narrower size, because we're dying for it. The bigger bikes have no problem fitting it. Ultra B can fit this tire size no problem, but us mid-size bike guys are really suffering here. Now I went ahead and threw this tire on here just to kind of gauge how much clearance I'm going to need. And now keep in mind, I don't have an inner tube in this tire right now, so the profile is very likely to change with pressure. But what I've found with that bike is when the tire actually goes flat, it rubs the chain more. But that's a wider wheel. Well, the rim is at least. So I'm not sure what's going to happen. This thing is super pinched on here with that narrow rim. But clearance-wise, I mean, it's interfering by about 3/16 of an inch right now. And here's the problem I was talking about, why I can't space the, come on, focus, why I can't space it out very far before this gets into the swing arm itself. I can change the bolts to where the bolt head doesn't protrude any, but even with a flush bolt, there's just not much room at all. So I'm going to be able to move this out a little more than a quarter inch, or sorry, a little more than 1/8 of an inch, 3 millimeter. And that's probably not going to give me enough room, but we'll see. It's going to rub at times. Now, this is my Alta Sigma, and you can see this is a VE33S, the same size, 110, 118, again, because nobody makes a narrower one, a gummy. And I cannot move the chain line out on it without a custom front sprocket, because it has a circlip or a snap ring that holds the front sprocket to the countershaft. So that kind of is what it is, but you can see I've had to very aggressively cut the knobs off. And some people say, oh, you lose side bite, but I found that to not be true. I've never had an issue with this tire. You can see the knobs on this side, how much of a difference there is. This still rubs. You can see, focus, come on. Please focus, there we go. You can see that's where the actual chain has been rubbing as I've been riding it. Makes a little noise, but it's not really a big issue. If you ride supermoto, you're used to having the chain rub the tire. But you can see this one, even with my swing arm extensions I've made, that it could be spaced out slightly. But the problem is up there at the motor. So this, we have a little bit more room to space it out, but it's gonna be close. But look at that tire on there. That thing's huge. Monster truck. That is a lot of sidewall to be squishy. It's gonna be awesome. Tire's really not much heavier than the stock tire, but it's a lot taller. And clearance wise, I'm in the middle of my adjustment right here. So you've got clearance to run it anywhere in the adjuster. So working on that. Hopefully I'll have some prototype parts soon on here and I'll be able to test it. I'm gonna order a rim lock and just still run a tube. I'm not gonna run mooses. I like running a tube just because I can dial in the air pressure I like, and a lot less maintenance than a moose. But that's where I'm at so far. This is what happens with low pressure and no rim lock. All right, so with your cover removed and your chain removed, this is what your sprocket will look like. You've got a little retaining bolt and a washer here. And all that does is hold the sprocket on this way. These splines are what keep the sprocket from twisting on this countershaft shaft. Now these are a fairly tight, small spline, which I like, and there's a really good fitment. So there's not much play at all. Some other bikes like the Alta Sigma and actually the EX 800 have a very coarse, large spline with only 6 or 8 splines, and the sprockets usually have a lot of movement on them. It's kind of agricultural, like a PTO on a tractor or something. But this is what I've come up with. The sprocket actually has a offset, so there's a big step on the side that goes towards the motor and a small step on this side, and if you flip it over, your chain alignment will be worse. It'll be more towards the center. But this is what I've come up with. This is just a little laser cut spacer out of steel or out of stainless, and you have to have these splines cut in it because if you look close, the undercut on this sprocket or on the shaft has the step. Well, there has to be that step there because that's what keeps the sprocket from rubbing on the motor itself. But it only touches at the tips of these splines, so there's tiny little contact. And then there's a big undercut, which there has to be a big undercut there or you cannot cut the splines fully. It's just how it's machined, how it has to be machined. So this little guy, zoom back out. This little guy is a tight fit, and it slides all the way down until it touches. And you actually don't really lose any spline engagement because where this spacer goes is where that undercut is. So this doesn't really make anything any weaker. You still have like 95% spline engagement. Come on, phone, please focus. And then you just put your sprocket back on how it was with the big step towards the motor. And this wind chime is making a lot of racket, but you can see how recessed the sprocket is now. And this washer has a step in it, which normally it goes this way because this is all flush. And I figured if I flip it over, that step is about the same thread pitch as this bolt, and it'll get me about 1 extra revolution of thread engagement. So I think that's gonna be enough for now. Again, this bolt isn't under a lot of pressure with the sprocket trying to come off, so it should be fine. I'm gonna tighten that up, and then we're gonna move to the back, and I'll show you what I'm gonna do there. But before I move to the back, I'm gonna point this out. This is a bellows which lets the motor expand and the air in the motor expand, and this will swell up or shrink down when the motor gets cold. And all that does is keep what's in the motor and water out. But you see that it's on this pivot here, and there's nothing stopping it from rubbing the chain. And I've noticed when the bike is upright, this wants to go down and possibly rub on the chain. So I'm either going to safety wire it or zip tie it to this motor mount here forward, just so it's out of the way and I don't have to worry about ripping a hole in it and sucking a bunch of water in the motor, which is pretty common because when you ride, this motor heats up, and if you go through a creek or water, the water hits the motor and that causes the motor to cool off rapidly. And when it cools off, the air inside cools off and it creates a suction, and it will, if there's a hole in this and it's in the water, it will suck water in the motor. So that's not something you want to happen. So it's going to be easy just to zip tie this forward and not have to worry about it rotating and getting torn up. So I'll do that real quick. And there we have that safety wired to where it can still do its bellows thing if it needs to, but it cannot rotate all the way down and hit the chain. So that should be all that needs to be done there. Now moving on to the rear sprocket, like I said earlier, this really needs shorter bolts. Not shorter length, but shorter head. These heads stick out just a little bit, and I need some flush ones. But you'll see that the spacer is too thick with those heads, which means these bolt heads are going to dig into the swing arm if we reuse them. So I should have got some shorter ones. But there you can see the spacer without the bolt head sticking out. I forgot to order bolts, and I forgot to order a rim lock, but I think I may have some bolts that will temporarily work. This is all just a kind of mock-up test fit to see if this is even possible. So we'll pull this apart real quick, show you how this works, and see what we find out. Please forgive me if I'm over-explaining this to some of you. I know a lot of you already know this, but this step is, I guess, what you would call hub-centric for like a car wheel. It locates the sprocket. So you see the sprocket fits down onto that step, and then your bolts just keep it from spinning and keep it nice and tight. That is a superior design to a lot of bikes that it's just flush, and it'd be kind of like this. There's nothing to locate it. So unfortunately with this prototype, I am losing the fact that it is hub-centric because this is thicker than that step. But again, this is just a prototype, so I may end up machining spacers that have a new step in them to keep it hub-centric like that. So I've got some bolts that are far too short here, but they are a true flathead where these have that step. So I'm going to throw some of these in and see how this fits together. And while I'm at this, I'm going to go ahead and throw a new heavy-duty tube in, and emphasis on heavy. It's about twice the weight and twice the thickness of the factory tube, but it wasn't the tube's fault that it popped. That was the lack of a rim lock. So factory tube, not bad at all. But I just have these on hand, and I'm gonna throw one in real quick. So maybe I can ride around on this a little bit and see how clearance is. And the last thing I need to worry about is this chain guide, which you can see is bent in towards the wheel a little bit. You can really see it right here, just from being hit on some rocks. And it's just aluminum, and it's fairly flexible. So I'm just gonna try to tweak it out for now. And I think it's got enough room in it to where the chain will clear just fine, but we'll see. So the bolts I had were too short, and I had some that were way too long, so I went ahead and cut them down because I will do just about anything instead of go to Ace Hardware and spend $20 on 5 bolts. So we'll repurpose these for now. All right, it's all back together, and it is tight. And actually, with these bolts that were too short, the heads were protruding just enough to actually rub on the swing arm with the axle tight. When I back it off a little bit, it wouldn't rub, but it is unbelievably tight, which means all the grit and sand and mud that gets in between those is just going to grind stuff down, which isn't ideal. So what I think I'm going to do, I've already redesigned the wheel spacers for this bike, because if you've seen my other videos, they don't seal very well to the actual seals to keep the wheel bearings clean. And when this swing arm isn't tight, it actually is flexed open a little bit. So there's a little bit of room, if I make this side wheel spacer just slightly longer, that it will open up that gap a little bit. And I think that's going to be ideal. Oh, and speaking of making stuff for this bike, if you guys are like me and you play in the rocks, you're going to bend your rear rotor pretty quick. So I've already designed a shark fin rotor guard for the back that I'm entering in production here momentarily. So in the next 2 or 3 weeks, that should be available on the website. Pretty excited about that. Yeah, check it out from this view. We got no clearance. I guess my math was right though. It's as wide a spacer as you can fit in there. So I did all that, and the chain still rubs, which I kind of knew it would. Also, I've got the wheel cocked slightly this way, so it's going to rub even worse if I true it up. And that kind of sucks, but I kind of knew that was going to happen because I could only space it that little amount. The good news is I think I could space the front a little bit more and design a swing arm that has more clearance. I don't know if I'd be able to sell any of those because they're going to be quite expensive, machining all that out. It's a lot of material. This, you can at least run a little bit wider tire than you could before. Still can't run this big boy 110, but better than nothing. So I'll continue messing with this a little bit and see what I can figure out. So thanks for watching. Just because some people are going to say, just dish the wheel over. You don't have much room. Not much room at all. Also, the easiest way I've found to cut knobs is one of these guys. Not that I would ever do such a thing.